When you think about the highlights in a motorsport year, you think about the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the Monaco Grand Prix, or the Indy 500. But for thousands of racing fans around the world, another event gets them excited for the month of June. The 24-hour race on the Nürburgring is the biggest motorsport event in Germany since the loss of the German Grand Prix. And the 24-hour race around here is something special. It tests man and machine and brings them to their absolute limits, staying focused for several hours, trying to avoid any mistake that could cost you the race. And when you combine that with one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging circuit in the world, which can come up with bright sunshine and world-ending rainfall at the same time on different parts of the circuit, you get something quite unique for a racing driver. You can't get this feeling of the Nürburgring and especially the Nordschleife anywhere else. I mean, there is a reason why Max Verstappen, the current F1 world champion, has tested his cars here and is known for wanting to drive on the circuit one day. But how did such a special track like this come about in the first place? Well, to fully understand the reasons behind the construction of the Nürburgring, we first have to go back to the origins of motorsport. It began on the 22nd of June in 1894 with a race from Paris to Rouen, even though not everybody sees this as the first race, because many say that the race from Paris to Bordeaux and back 1 year later, in June 1895, was actually the first one. And back then, a race meant that you would drive from one city to another, with the first one to arrive being the winner. More and more cities and countries started to hold their own races over the next few years, because the first ones were a success, and motorsport itself became more and more popular. This first successful period of motorsport would unfortunately end after the tragedy of the 1903 race from Paris to Madrid, where several people died, including Marcel Renault, one of the co-founders of Renault. This marked the end for races from city to city, and motorsport experienced its first crisis. It could only overcome this via the switch to racing on closed circuits. But it wouldn't stop this new sport from becoming more and more popular, especially since the automobile itself was becoming more and more popular. However, closed circuits meant that you would still race on public roads, but these were just closed during the events. It was an improvement, but a lot of people knew that the safety for the drivers and the spectators was still poor. So they started to think about creating proper racetracks on which you could race without risking the life of spectators. And one of these people was Wilhelm II, the Emperor of Germany at the time. He wanted to build such a track to show off the power and reliability of the German cars. In fact, Germany had already held some races itself, with events like the Kaiser Prize, which was held multiple times between 1907 and 1911. And during the plans for the location for the new circuit, the Eifel region was already taken into consideration. Unfortunately, the First World War put these plans aside for the next few years. After the war had ended, motorsport wasn't the number one priority for many people in Europe. They had to focus on other things like getting enough money to buy food. Fortunately, not a lot of infrastructure was damaged during the war, which made it possible for Grand Prix racing to continue in the early 1920s. Especially France and Italy began holding Grand Prix in their countries from 1921 on. And Germany had also started its comeback to racing. For this, the country had built a new racetrack in Berlin, the Avis. It was a relatively basic and also quite boring course, consisting of only two corners that were connected by two long straights which were part of the public road system. But one thing about the circuit was special, and that was its north corner. Here, the drivers would get into a massively banked U-turn that could literally send you straight to heaven if you made a mistake. But apart from this death trap of a corner, the circuit was pretty boring. The flat nature of the circuit, with no inclines or tight turns, made it pretty hard to show off the performance of the cars. And for spectators, it didn't offer good racing. So it was clear that Germany needed a new racetrack for the growing crowd of spectators and its automotive industry. The search for a new place for the new circuit began, and once again, the Eifel region was among the candidates. But why exactly is this region so ideal for a racetrack? Well, this is down to multiple factors. For one, the region consists of many forests with a lot of hills and valleys that make it very challenging for the drivers and the cars. Second, it would be a great place to test and show off cars from the German manufacturers. And third, the population density in the region was one of the lowest in the country, which had to do with the poor economical situation around here. There was no big industry, and the land was also not good for farming, so a lot of people moved away and only a small amount of farmers stayed. It was even called Prussia's Siberia, because it was so poor, but even the people from the Eifel region had realized the potential of motorsport. At the time, races like the Eiffel Tour were already held in the region, with a lot of people just coming because of these races. And one man wanted to take it to the next level, with a proper racetrack for the region. And his name was Otto Kreutz, the district administrator of Adenau, a part of the Eifel region in which the Nürburgring is located. So he presented his idea at the founding of the local automobile and motorcycle club. He had the numbers of the previously successful races and said that it might be a good possibility to give the people in the region a workplace. A lot of people were happy with the idea, but there was one problem. The region itself could never find enough money to build such a track, so they would have to find someone that would give them enough money to build it. Fortunately for Kreutz, he still had some political connections to Berlin. He relived those to see if the state was willing to finance the project. And as we already know, Germany was looking for a region to build a racetrack in, so the state gave Kreutz and the region the financial support for the construction of the course. And Kreutz already had a concept for the circuit in mind. He wanted a gigantic circuit that would go through the whole region, a 28-kilometer long track. You can still see these through some corner names, like Quiddelbach, Arenberg or Kallenhardt, which are small towns next to the circuit. It should have everything. Long straights for good overtaking opportunities, tight sections that would challenge the drivers, inclines, banking, all of that in one circuit. The concept of the circuit would also see that there would be two parts, a smaller southern part, the Südschleife, and a bigger northern part, the Nordschleife. And what was really important in all of that for Kreutz was that the track would still have the characteristics of a country road. It should be a racetrack, but also feel like a ride through the region. And the different characteristics of the circuit should push the cars to the limits, making it good for German car manufacturers to test their cars. The planning and the preparation took some time, but in July 1925 the construction work began. But it was a little bit different to what you might expect, because instead of using technologically advanced machinery, which had already existed back then, people from all around the Western German area came to build the circuit with pickaxes and shovels. This was done on purpose in order to give as many people from the region as possible some work. Because of this, up to 3,000 people could work at the circuit. And the constructors also made sure that the circuit was suited with modern technology. For example, the circuit got its own telephone network, which made it possible for marshals to call the officials in the paddock if a crash happened and they would need a tow truck or an ambulance. And what is amazing is that the entire circuit was built in just 2 years. But one detail was still missing. The track needed a name. For this, a competition was set up, with Nürburgring being the winner. The name is obviously inspired by the old castle, the Nürburg, which is located inside the track itself. And after everything was said and done, the circuit could be opened. However, nobody knew if it would be a success before the opening event in June 1927. But those worries would vanish pretty quickly, as 85,000 people would come to the opening event of the circuit. Nobody in the region could believe what they were seeing. Never had there been that many people in this underdeveloped region, let alone at the same time, and all of that just to visit the circuit. Otto Kreutz had done it. Not only had he built one of the most modern circuits in the world for German motorsport and their car industry, but he had also created a tourist magnet that would get people from all around Germany into the region and would give the people the possibility to earn some proper money for the first time. But Kreutz wouldn't be able to reap the fruits of his hard work, because in the 1930s the Nazis would use the ring as a propaganda machine for their uses. And in the process, they made it look like they had built the circuit and made it a success, not Kreutz. I know this is something you don't want to talk about, but it is part of the history of the Nürburgring, and I think it is better to talk about it than to act like it doesn't exist. What was even worse for Kreutz, however, was that he was banned from visiting the ring. This was probably down to him not being part of the Nazi party, but of the Zechner party, another conservative party in Germany at the time. This was extremely painful for him, and I cannot imagine how he must have felt when he received the news that he can't visit his own project anymore. He had done so much to make this project a success, and all he could do now was listen to the races over the radio. Fortunately, in 2002, a memorial stone was built for him, which is now in front of the Dorint Hotel at the circuit. So go and have a look at it when you are at the ring yourself. Meanwhile, the circuit was becoming more and more popular, with more and more people attending the races. This will keep going until 1939, when World War II began. From there on, racing in Europe would be paused for the next few years. Towards the end of the war, in March 1945, when the Allies took more and more of German territory, the Nürburgring was damaged by the American tanks that would use the circuit for their advance. The asphalt of the circuit was damaged massively in parts of the circuit, which made it unusable for racing activities. Especially the southern part of the circuit was damaged heavily. After the end of the war, the track became part of the French Allied zone. They decided to rebuild the track completely within a few months, probably because some French racing drivers had been successful here before. This was one of the reasons why the circuit could already open its gates once again in 1947. However, you could still see that the war hadn't been long ago. On top of your ticket to a race, you would get a food package that would include a sausage, some potato salad, and a glass of wine. What was the most important thing for the region, however, was that the circuit had survived the war. Over the next few years, the circuit would get back its role as one of the most important racing tracks in Europe, and the highlight up to this point would mark the 1954 German Grand Prix, where up to 300,000 people would come to the circuit to see the race. Not even 10 years after the end of the war, the circuit could attract even more people than it had ever been before. This would lay the foundation for the next few decades, in which the circuit would cement its role as the most important racetrack in Germany and one of the most challenging in the world. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about the history of the Nürburgring. Feel free to subscribe, and until then, I'll see you next time.